Everyone, welcome to the Cosmos Club, where we tweet daily about what's going on in the Cosmos ecosystem, the Cosmoverse, summarizing that in a weekly newsletter. So if you haven't signed up already, please do. It's easy on our profile where you can subscribe via Twitter. And then finally, we invite awesome guests to the to Spaces, which is then distributed out on Spotify and all the other podcast platforms. And today we have ZetaChain. So welcome, guys, to the Cosmos Club.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Glad to be here.
So I always like to ask, and by the way, great that you all could join. It always creates a greater conversation, I think, when we got multiple team members on the space, because then you get different approaches that people typically have on the team, which is always nice to hear. But yeah, I always like to ask in the beginning, guys, what is ZetaChain about? The Zeta token that is coming out, and why do people need to pay attention here?
I could jump in here, and I mean, before even talking about ZetaChain, I think one of the big important dilemmas in the space right now is around interoperability, and specifically interoperability among blockchains and how information and data and assets are passed from one chain to another. And when you think about some of the current approaches that we've seen in the past few years, call it, solutions that are trying to bridge the gap, no pun intended, they have in the process created some pretty serious attack vectors. And at the end of the day, a lot of these solutions are not truly interoperable with any chain or layer. And so that's a big opportunity. And I think it's important because just like Web 1 protocols, people need to be able to use the internet and send emails to each other. And I think the argument for interoperability in blockchain and Web3 is similar. And part of our thesis is that the environment is multi-chain and that's going to continue to persist. So it's a problem right now and it's growing. So that's a bit on interoperability.
Yeah, I think Jonathan explained it pretty well. And like to add some points to it, like how ZetaChain is sort of different from the multiple bridge protocols that we already have, is the fact that we focus more on like being transparent and providing like faster finality for all of these transactions, the cross-chain transactions that happen. And the way that the process that we have, maybe we'll discuss that more over this conversation, but it's slightly different from other bridges, which enables us to provide these features. And that's what I feel is like the key differentiating factor between what ZetaChain is doing right now or planning to do and what some of the other bridges are doing.
Yeah, and I would like to dwell on this actually now that you mentioned bridges up front, because we all know what happened this week with Nomad. I mean, Nomad was just the most recent example of bridges getting hacked. We got many other examples of that. Ronin, Wormhole, like the list just goes on and on, it feels like. And then we got IBC, of course, in Cosmos. And I think the overarching argument for anyone who is into the Cosmos ecosystem is that IBC trumps bridges any day, all day. So I would really like to know, or I think the community would like to know, how does Zeta sort of, where do you guys play? Where are you guys placed basically? Like, is it more like a bridge functionality that you're building, IPC? Like, how do you guys connect to all this?
That's actually a very interesting question, and the shortest answer to that is what ZetaChain is trying to build is it follows a very similar architecture to what IBC is, but it's not limited to Cosmos chains. So the uh, like whatever bridges that we have had so far hinge on the fact that there is an asset which gets locked in some amount in some smart contract, and some other assets are minted on this other chain based on this locked asset. And multiple, like you mentioned, a couple of different hacks and issues that we have found, and all of these hinge on the fact that there are assets locked at some point. IBC is different in a way because it does escrow, but it follows an actor model, and therefore passes the message across the chain. And the other chain is basically reading these messages and relaying it across. And that's what ZetaChain does as well. Like there is no concept of tokens getting locked. It's messages that are relayed across one network to another, and that is about it. So the user never really has to, lock their own original token. So we are secure in that fashion because that attack vector is not present at all.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I can add a little bit more onto that. I guess that was a great explanation of how we differ from the functionality of bridges, specifically for the use case of sending value from different chains to different chains. And then, like, the layer on top of that, which I think is potentially even more powerful, is that we are a blockchain, like an L1 blockchain in ourselves. So what happens is you can deploy a smart contract on ZetaChain that can orchestrate liquidity or data on connected chains. So that's like a new paradigm of app building that doesn't really exist right now, and is in a way like our own rendition of something that IBC has attempted to achieve, but in a chain agnostic way, and with a cool property of being able to deploy cross-chain or chain agnostic logic in a single place. So rather than a lot of the like bridging or communication protocols that exist right now, like Nomad, for example, you could just deploy a single contract rather than having to deploy contracts on all of the chains and pass messages between them. So yeah, that's just feeling.
That's pretty mind blowing for anyone who's ever deployed a dApp to any chain. I used to be personally heavily involved in Ethereum. I built a bunch of stuff in Solidity, fell in love with the Cosmos community because I think a lot of people who follow this account have heard me say this multiple times. But basically, what happens when you are in Ethereum, Avalanche, Solana, you name it, you become almost like a maxi. You have to vouch for that chain only. And whichever so you become a maxi almost by definition, building on these chains. And I didn't see that happen on Cosmos. Like every time there was a new project launching on Cosmos, I just saw everybody else cheering them on, like, vouching for them, because we all know that the bigger the ecosystem becomes on Cosmos, the more successful we will all become because of IBC. And what you're saying right now, Brandon, sounds pretty mind-blowing to someone like me, actually. If chains are able to deploy, or if anyone is able to deploy their dApp, and then Zeta somehow, I don't understand quite how, but somehow makes sure that that can be compatible to multiple different chains, omnichain, as you say.
Yeah, definitely like something we really believe is new that we're bringing it to the table. And then, yeah, of course, it comes in different phases. So initially, what we have live on testnet right now allows you to send messages in the same way as some communication protocols. but with the caveat of, as Tanmay was saying, that we can support native asset transfer rather than a bridged, like lock mint bridge architecture that has been the culprit or the point of attack for all of these bridge hacks you hear about. And then after this messaging layer, we will release support for the omnichain smart contracts, which I agree is both technologically cool in that you can have a single place of logic for a lot of the things that would normally be fragmented, but also for that community aspect where really like new crypto applications or protocols being built in this new world won't necessarily be tied to a chain. They should be chain agnostic by default. At least that's how we're imagining it. And with that, there isn't that whole maxi dynamic. It's more like if you have a good application, that application should be able to live across chains and have a pleasant UX to where a user might not even have to worry about what chain they are on or where they need to get their assets. They can just use application A. You know, if you have assets that you've gotten onto your Phantom wallet or your MetaMask or whatever, that's kind of the future we're imagining, where from developers' standpoint, it's chain agnostic, and also to users, it's chain agnostic, or that's just abstracted. And of course, there are a lot of steps to get there.
Yeah, of course. Rome wasn't built in one day. But that's pretty fascinating, I feel like. And I think a burning question that a lot of people would have after hearing this is how do you compare yourselves? Like, what exists today that you would sort of look to and say it's similar to that? Like, is it THORChain, you know, with this sort of native swaps, for example, kind of thing? Is it like an evolved version of IPC that goes beyond the Cosmos ecosystem? Like, how would you compare ZetaChain to something that exists already?
Yeah, I can take this, and maybe Tommy, if you want to chime in on more technical perspective. But yeah, I guess high level architecture wise, we have taken some inspiration from things like THORChain that are able to trade assets between different chains. But I guess the ecosystem we're imagining could be maybe more akin to a single chain, if that makes sense. So, or like this omni-chain concept, if that makes sense. So, yeah, we would serve as a meta layer for all of these chains to orchestrate whatever they need to do. Some applications might need to build a lot of the logic or compute on a certain chain because maybe compute is cheaper or more feasible than doing everything on Ethereum. But being able to move assets where you need security or whatever like specialization a blockchain has that a developer needs very freely. So something that exists right now, hard to exactly put a parallel, but a sort of meta layer for people to build crypto applications in general, where they can excel in whatever aspect they need, performance, security, etc., or even targeting certain social graphs. So in the multi-chain world, there is a chance there will still be leanings towards certain environments, like if a ton of games are built on Avalanche and that is the gaming ecosystem, then that is something we want to support, but we also want to open users to be able to both go into that ecosystem and go to another ecosystem very easily rather than being locked down.
Interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah. So like what Brandon mentioned, like it's difficult to draw parallels with any network which exists right now. But from a technical standpoint, what ZetaChain does is like we build the infrastructure which separates out the smart contract layer from the state machine. And what this allows you to do is like build your dApps and like the smart contracts which these dApps interact with without having to think about what chain or what state this smart contract will be executing on. Because ZetaChain provides the infrastructure for you to relay messages across these chains. So you can concentrate on building your dApp, deploying the smart contract without having to worry about which specific chain you're targeting, because that does not really matter. Like you don't, it's not important for you to worry about like where, like what part of the state this contract is modifying in a way.
True, and I think that's sort of the dream or the goal that a lot of people would like to have, but has not been technically possible for whatever reason in the past. But then perhaps talk us through the journey almost that a developer goes through. Say I'm a completely green dApp developer. You know, let's say I built a couple of websites and I heard of Web3, and now I want to dive into, you know, blockchain development and build my first dApp. Um, I don't care if I build it on Ethereum or Solana or ZetaChain. It doesn't matter to me. I just want to deploy something. How would I do that with ZetaChain? Or what would be the steps that, like, what programming language? How would I deploy? Like, maybe you can talk more about that.
Yeah. So I think the lowest barrier to entry way of developing right now is the steps a developer would take are you would have a contract, maybe like NFT or an existing contract you could maybe kickstart development with, or your own custom contract that you're building from scratch in Solidity. And the way you integrate ZetaChain is you implement 3 functions: send, receive, and handling reverts. And then with that logic, you can deploy on multiple chains and be able to move things or whatever you need to move, whether it's data or value, between different chains, just by deploying the same contract on all the chains you want to support. So really just implementing those 3 functions, getting that logic correct, is the only step a developer needs to take right now beyond learning Solidity. And then as we add additional chain support with different contract languages like Cosmwasm, for example, you could do the equivalent, but with those languages / platforms.
Cool.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. So what Brandon mentioned, a developer would basically be implementing those 3 functions, and the function names are pretty self-explanatory. And if you want to run like a message across chain, those are 3 outcomes that can happen, right? And based on the outcome from your message, one of those 3 things would be triggered, and that's how the message will be relayed across the chain. So you can think of like deploying a contract in chain A, sending a message to chain B, and executing one of those 3 things in the middle.
Cool. So that's from a developer perspective. What about a user's perspective? So something that a lot of people find at least surprising, maybe sometimes, is that they might be used to MetaMask, but they haven't heard of Kepler, for example. And all of a sudden they need to install a new wallet, set that up. Like, it's not difficult. It's just they're used to using MetaMask for everything. So how will there be a different wallet for ZetaChain also similar to Kepler, or will you be able to use Kepler or another Cosmos kind of integrated wallet? Or how will the user interact with ZetaChain?
Sure. So it's a lot simpler than that, at least for the base case. With a contract like Tommy was describing that has those three outcomes: send, receive, revert. To a user, they would just be interacting with a contract that exists on a chain that they're already using. So their MetaMask on Ethereum mainnet, for example. If they wanted to interact with one of these apps that had ZetaChain integrated, would just send a transaction to that contract, just as they interact with anything like minting an NFT. And assets or data to another chain. If you were sending assets to Cosmos chain, for example, then maybe the user has to understand that. Like, oh, I want to send my NFT from Ethereum mainnet to Cosmos. That entails they need to get a new wallet. But if they're just sending between two networks supported by MetaMask, they just need to send a transaction, just like they would send an NFT or do a Uniswap transaction. So just a single step, and ZetaChain handles all of the cross-chain transfer as well as gas fees on the destination. So there's none of that like issue where you end up bridging some asset and then you don't have any gas to unlock it on the destination. And a lot of that UX is completely abstracted away from a normal user.
Man, if you solve that problem, just the last one that you mentioned there, you would have done a hell of a lot of good in this world. I mean, there just seems to be no limits to the hurting that is happening because of bridges and how liquidity is almost like isolated depending on the chain, right? Or the wallets that's being used. And perhaps you can speak to that actually. Perhaps you can speak to one of the what are the big benefits in creating this interoperable world? I just mentioned liquidity. I guess that could be a first. But what else do you see happening with ZetaChain once that's being rolled out? And on the back of that question is also, where are you now in the development process? I know you have a testnet perhaps coming up soon, so maybe speak more to that.
Yeah, so testnet is actually live for developers to build on. We haven't released any like public UI for that for general community to mess around with, but you can like look at the live explorer and addresses on our docs to start developing if you're interested in that. And our team, beyond just us three, are online on Discord if like anyone has any questions or wants to get started with that. As far as sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was your initial question?
My initial question was basically what the big problems interoperability is solving. I mentioned liquidity myself, stealing your thunder a bit, but maybe there are others that you would like to highlight.
Got it. Yeah. So I guess we can talk about it in terms of where we envision the ecosystem going, particularly for users. And yeah, I think that liquidity lockup issue is an example of just the broader issue of there being a bunch of barriers to entry, whichever way you go in crypto right now, whether it's KYCing and getting assets onto a wallet in the first place, transferring it to a different chain, purchasing things, looking at games that are on chains that you don't have things on, whatever. And also people like developers having to deploy the same contracts on all of these different chains, and not like it just adding more fragmentation to the system.
Yeah.
To us, and UX is you can pay from and receive into any wallet. That like any marketplace should support that sort of functionality. So interoperability in terms of like purchasing and like selling NFTs. But yeah, it's a combination of that interoperability with a level of being able to pick your poison. So if you want to go to a chain, as I was saying before, that has certain specializations, you can do that. But no barriers to doing that as there are right now.
And also not a problem, but really like having cross-chain smart contracts opens up like various avenues for developers of these smart contracts, because now they have access to all of these cool things which did not exist before, and they can build much better and more interesting smart contracts, explore the DeFi landscape from a different angle now, because now you would have smart contracts running across chains, and you can think of new things to do with this. Like you can think of cross-chain dexes and stuff like that, which did not exist before. And I feel that's one of the important things that ZetaChain brings into perspective after we have the cross-chain smart contracts working.
I see. Interesting. It sure is an exciting world out there, and in Cosmos in particular, if you ask me. And that begs the question. Obviously, we are Cosmos focused accounts, and a lot of our followers, listeners will be interested in Cosmos in particular. So why did you guys choose to build with Cosmos? What were your thoughts behind it? And perhaps also a bit of background on you. Like, you sound like you have been building stuff with Ethereum in the past. Perhaps a bit of background on you as well.
Sure. So to answer the first part of the question, why Cosmos? So one of the things that we were looking for is like faster finality on the chain, and as a consensus layer, Tendermint was one of the best options that we could choose, and Cosmos just provides a nice wrapper on top of Tendermint to build the ABCI app on. So that was one of the reasons. The other important reason was the community itself, because it, I feel like the camaraderie that exists in Cosmos between all of these different projects is excellent. And I think you mentioned this before as well. Like whenever there's a new project, it's cheered on by everyone else because it's boosts the ecosystem overall, right? Like if one project succeeds, it helps the whole ecosystem. And I think that plays very well with this whole interoperability thing, because we are talking about bridging chains, we are talking about communication between chains and how these chains would interact with each other. And this plays very well with the ideas and the ideals of Cosmos in general. So those were some of the things. Brandon, if you want to add something else, go ahead.
No, I think that was a great answer. And then, yeah, for our background, my background is more in general startups and Web2, and um, building some things on Ethereum as well, but more in like the prototype development stages. And then Tane's background is working directly in Cosmos SDK and some related projects. And the rest of the team has some background in both like exchange work, so building some of the largest exchanges that exist today, and then also academic backgrounds in distributed computing and high performance computing that translates to building blockchain technologies pretty well.
Nice. Yeah, you do sound like a very technical heavy team. Chatting with you guys, talking to you guys, like you seem to have all the technical capabilities to be able to pull this off, to be honest, which is great. This is what projects need. And we mentioned before the space officially went live, at least, that you have been in sort of stealth mode. You've been building this in silence, where a lot of projects they do the opposite. They talk they talk a great talk before having anything really to show for. So perhaps talk us through that. You have tested live now. Like, what were your thoughts on launching ZetaChain? Because obviously, being an interoperable protocol means that hopefully everyone will implement and hear about you guys in the first place. So, what were your sort of roadmap? How does your roadmap sort of look like, both in the past and going forward?
Yeah, I think our strategy in terms of launching to mainnet beyond this current testnet is to launch with partners who are building things for real users. So we will announce some pretty exciting partnerships in time as we get closer to mainnet and even beyond mainnet launch. But all of those partners are they have fairly large user bases on their own and want to integrate cross-chain in a safe way for their users. So, for example, a very large exchange is working with us. Some projects working on some DeFi related things and NFT projects. So when we get to mainnet, we want to help amplify those use cases, bringing more users to the ecosystem in general, whether it's coming from a zero crypto background or a degen very in it crypto native background. So that's the strategy there, and we are doing that and not necessarily doing all the hype stuff now, because we're focused on real utility. For reference, our internal metric that we are tracking is monthly transacting users, things like TVL and some other metrics that other protocols might lean more towards are ones that we don't think necessarily adds the same value or represents the same thing. So that's how we're thinking about that. And then roadmap timeline of mainnet, we'll release more details in the coming months, but have some pretty exciting updates to come if you stay tuned on our social and Discord.
Yeah, and I heavily encourage people to do that if you haven't done that already. Go and follow ZetaChain on their Twitter and Discord, etc. There's a lot of cool information, I think. I've been in this space for a long time, but just reading up on your articles and all that, it really shows that you guys know what you're talking about. So I can highly encourage people to do that already. And that brings me to Zeta, the token that you are launching with the chain. I mean, obviously, when people talk about roadmap, they look at what do you have in store, sort of what is coming, and all that kind of stuff. And then shortly after, especially in Cosmos, is when airdrop, when can we buy this, da 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 da. So maybe you can speak more to that.
Yeah, so we've kind of brushed over it in talking about how ZetaChain works, but the way that bridgeless native transfer works is built into the protocol in that the only coin that is, or value that is transferred through ZetaChain cross-chain is Zeta, the coin. So when you swap, for example, on a DEX built on top of ZetaChain, you would, if you're swapping Ethereum on ETH mainnet to USDC on Polygon, you would send that ETH to a smart contract, like a DEX contract, that would swap your ETH for Zeta. Zeta would be burned, and then Zeta would be minted on the destination Polygon and then swapped for USDC. So built into anything moving across this new omnichain ecosystem is usage of the coin Zeta. So it is a utility focused coin. And yeah, because of that, when we go mainnet, that entails the coin will also be in use and available in the ecosystem.
And not to be too pushy on this, but I know this is a burning question that people have. But will there be an airdrop? Are you considering an airdrop in the Cosmos ecosystem? Not that you have to mention the details about it, but is that something that you've settled on already or considering right now?
I guess to be transparent, we can't release any details on that right now. We
That's
are
fair.
excited to engage more with our community and get people contributing and giving them more routes to contribute to just the community in general and the actual protocol. So we have a pretty exciting update coming up, likely next week, that will give you guys and our community in general a very powerful route to engage with us and engage with the protocol, help us test it, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's the most exciting. Yeah.
That's fair. And I ask because I know it's something that is on a lot of people's minds, both in this call, but also in general. But I think what I want to underline is that people should invest in this if they are investing or show interest in this for the tech, because it really is pretty promising what you guys are working on. So that's what people should be looking for first and foremost. And then perhaps there's a financial opportunity, but that should be secondary. Cool. So what do you think is like the end game for ZetaChain? Is that just for everyone to run transactions? All their activity should run on ZetaChain or be compatible with ZetaChain, or what's the end game here, guys?
Yeah, I think the end game is similar to what we were talking about before, where there are other blockchains that exist that have specializations, fortes, and we serve as the connecting layer that either orchestrates things across those different blockchains or lets you move things directly between certain ones. So kind of like a universal meta layer for crypto. And I guess adding on to that is that's very core functionality for a seamless crypto ecosystem. So we like to think of ZetaChain as a public good of sorts, in the same way something like Ethereum exists now and will likely exist into the future as. So it's not just like a way for, even if you're launching a new protocol, you will always have that flexibility to go to a new one or help your users onboard from a different chain and that sort of thing, without the hurdles that exist today that we've talked about a bunch already.
Yeah, and to add on to that point, I think ZetaChain is the gateway to really make crypto mainstream in general, abstracting away a lot of these fragmented steps that we've talked about over this call. And I think as corporations start to engage Web3 protocols and do on-chain stuff, like they're going to inherently want to have options, and we're going to be ready for that. So I think this is what helps make crypto more mainstream, because the fact is that it's still a pretty small space, and there, we live in crypto Twitter, and there's hype and we're in servers and stuff on Discord, but Solana only has like 300,000 active users, so they claim. And so there's a lot more runway here when you just think about tech and the internet on a relative basis.
Yeah. And do you think, just a follow up on that, do you think interoperability is like something that could be a catalyst for people to, like more people to get into Web3, blockchain, etc.? Because I mean, blockchain theory has been around for more than a decade, right? Also in practice, not just in theory, by the way. Decade obviously is not too long, but still, we live in a heavily networked world. So it is a bit surprising to at least me that we haven't seen that much adoption yet, people doing transactions and more activity happening on Web3. Do you think, so in a nutshell, do you think interoperability is going to be like a killer feature that's going to make some sort of catalyst event for adoption?
I think it's definitely part of the case for some of the reasons we talked about, but also market maturity is required with any of these transformational technologies. So 10 years plus sounds about right. So I think the world needs to evolve as well.
Yeah. Awesome. So is there anything left that you would like the community to know before we close this thing off? As I mentioned in the beginning, I'm sitting here in Copenhagen. It's becoming late. But yeah, is there anything else the community should know? I know you guys have a lot of things in store, and obviously, as mentioned before, they should follow you so they can keep themselves updated. But anything that you would like them to know already?
I think first of all, I'm glad that we're on your radar and more ingrained in the Cosmos ecosystem. And I think at this time, just stay tuned for updates. Brandon dropped some alpha before that I was afraid to say, so I didn't get my hand slapped. But exciting things coming in the near term. And we got a bunch of creative contests, t-shirt designs. We're going to do a TikTok challenge next week. So we're trying to be fun and lighthearted around what is a really dense, important, and technical area of crypto. And ZetaChain will decentralize over time. So everybody's contributions are appreciated, and more to come on that.
Right on. So with that, I would like to close this thing off. Thank you so much, ZetaChain, for joining the Cosmos Club tonight. For anyone who has any follow-up questions, I invite you to tweet in the. We have a tweet with this space link to this space on, and you can add your comments in there and perhaps ask your questions if you had any follow-ups after this space. And with that, thank you so much, ZetaChain, for joining tonight, and all the best to you.
Thank you, Mark, and the Cosmos Club. Talk again soon.
Yeah, man.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Mark, for having us.
Stay safe, guys.
Cheers. Bye.
Yes,
Ciao.
bye-bye.